The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Ridge Shooting Range, a facility that prided itself on serving serious marksmen and military personnel. The concrete firing lanes stretched out like surgical tables, each one equipped with precision rests and electronic scoring systems that could measure accuracy down to fractions of an inch. But on this particular Saturday morning, the usual atmosphere of focused concentration would be shattered by a revelation that none of the weekend warriors could have seen coming. Rebecca Frost Mitchell adjusted the scope on her rifle with the kind of methodical precision that most people never noticed. To the dozen men scattered across the other firing lanes, she appeared to be exactly what they expected to see. A middle-aged woman in faded jeans and a plain gray hoodie, probably someone's wife who had been dragged along for a morning of fun shooting. What they couldn't know was that Rebecca had earned her nickname by making shots in sub-zero temperatures that would have been impossible for most trained snipers, and that the rifle she was assembling had accounted for more confirmed kills than any weapon most of them would ever touch. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this extraordinary story of hidden expertise and hard-earned respect, tell me in the comments, what city in the world are you watching from today? And if you believe that deadly precision often comes in the most unassuming packages, hit that subscribe button. What happens when these men discover who they've been ignoring will leave you speechless. Rebecca had been coming Pine Ridge for 3 months, ever since she'd moved to the small town of Cedar Falls to start what she hoped would be a quiet retirement. After 18 years as one of the Army's most decorated snipers, she had earned the right to disappear into civilian life, to trade her ghillie suit for garden gloves and her rifle for a fishing rod. But old habits died hard, and she found herself at the shooting range most Saturday mornings, drawn by the familiar comfort of controlled breathing and precise trigger control. The other shooters at Pine Ridge had quickly categorized her as harmless and irrelevant. They were mostly local hunters, weekend tactical enthusiasts, and a few retired police officers who enjoyed reliving their glory days through discussions of ballistics and marksmanship. Rebecca's quiet demeanor and unremarkable appearance made her invisible to their particular brand of masculine posturing. Ladies and gentlemen, announced Tommy Rodriguez, the range safety officer and self-appointed authority on all things firearms related. We've got a special guest today. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison just returned from his 3rd deployment in Afghanistan, and he's brought some of his Army buddies for a friendly competition. Rebecca looked up from her rifle preparation to see a group of young soldiers entering the range. They moved with the confident swagger of men who had seen combat, and returned home with stories to tell and skills to prove. Leading them was Morrison, a stocky man in his late 20s whose bearing suggested someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Frost, Rebecca whispered to herself, using the call sign that had once struck fear into the hearts of insurgents across 3 different war zones. She recognized the type immediately. Competent soldiers who had earned their confidence through legitimate combat experience, but who had never encountered someone operating at the level she had once achieved. Morrison's group quickly set up at the premium lanes, their equipment modern and expensive. As they began their warm-up rounds, their conversation carried across the range at the kind of volume that suggested they enjoyed being overheard. 300 yards, no wind compensation, Morrison announced as he settled into his firing position. Let's see who remembers their training. The soldiers took turns demonstrating their marksmanship, each shot accompanied by commentary about technique, equipment modifications, and war stories that established their credentials. Rebecca continued her own preparation in silence, methodically checking her rifle zero and calculating the environmental factors that would affect her shots. "Hey, Jake," called out one of Morrison's companions, a lean soldier named Danny Chun. "Looks like we got some civilians trying to keep up with professionals." Morrison glanced around the range, his eyes briefly passing over Rebecca, without recognition or interest. "Yeah, well, let them enjoy their hobby. Maybe they'll learn something by watching real shooters work." Rebecca felt a familiar stirring of competitive instinct, but she forced herself to remain focused on her own shooting. She had learned long ago that the most effective way to handle arrogance was to let performance speak for itself. She lined up her first shot at the 200-yard target, controlling her breathing with the discipline that had been drilled into her through years of the most demanding training the military had to offer. The shot broke clean and true, the electronic scoring system immediately registering a perfect center hit. Rebecca smoothly worked the bolt and prepared for her second shot, her movements economical and practiced. The small group of civilian shooters near her position noticed the precision of her shots, but Morrison's group was too focused on her own performance to pay attention to the quiet woman 3 lanes down. "Rebecca's looking good today," commented Frank Miller, a retired police sergeant who had been shooting at Pine Ridge for over a decade. Frank was one of the few people at the range who treated Rebecca with genuine respect, having recognized early on that her shooting skills were significantly above average. "She always does," replied Carl Henderson, an elderly hunter who had watched Rebecca shoot dozens of times without ever learning much about her background. "That woman can put 10 rounds through the same hole at 200 yards like it's nothing." But their quiet conversation was drowned out by Morrison's group, who had moved on to more challenging shots and were discussing their performance with increasing volume and confidence. "For 100 yards, 5-round group," Morrison announced. "Danny, let's see if that new scope you're so proud of actually makes a difference." Danny Chin settled into his position with obvious confidence, his expensive rifle and custom scope representing thousands of dollars in precision equipment. His shots were good, well within military standards and impressive by civilian measures. The group clustered around the spotting scope to evaluate his performance. "Not bad, Chun. 2-inch group at 400. That's solid work," Morrison said approvingly. Rebecca continued her own shooting routine, moving systematically through distance increments with a methodical approach that had made her legendary among her peers. At 300 yards, her 5-shot group measured just under 1 inch. At 400 yards, she tightened it to 3/4 of an inch. At 500 yards, a distance that challenged most of the range's regular users, she maintained sub-inch accuracy that would have been noteworthy at any military training facility. But her exceptional shooting was happening in relative silence, noticed only by the handful of regular civilians who had grown accustomed to her remarkable consistency. Morrison's group remained focused on their own competition, their attention drawn to performances that were impressive by normal standards but unremarkable compared to what Rebecca was achieving just 3 lanes away. "Time to show these civilians how it's really done," Morrison announced as he prepared for a 500-yard shot. This is the range where training separates from amateur hour. Rebecca paused in her own shooting to watch Morrison's technique. His form was solid, his equipment appropriate, and his confidence well-founded. When he fired, the shot was excellent by most measures, a clean hit within the 10 ring that demonstrated genuine skill and training. "That's how you handle long-range precision," Morrison said with satisfaction as he observed his shot through the spotting scope. 500 yards, dead center. Not many people can make that shot consistently. Danny Chin clapped his friend on the shoulder. "Outstanding, Jake. That's the kind of shooting that kept us alive over there." As Morrison's group celebrated their marksmanship, Rebecca quietly prepared for her own 500-yard shot. She had been planning to pack up and leave, but something about their casual dismissal of everyone else's abilities had awakened the competitive spirit that had driven her to become one of the most feared snipers in military history. She settled into her firing position with movements so smooth and practiced that they seemed almost choreographed. Her breathing slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that allowed her to fire between heartbeats. Her grip on a rifle was relaxed but absolute, the weapon becoming an extension of her body rather than a separate tool. The shot broke with perfect timing, the bullet leaving the barrel at the precise moment when every variable, wind, breathing, sight picture, trigger control, aligned in perfect harmony. The electronic scoring system registered the impact instantly, a perfect center hit that struck within millimeters of the absolute center of the target. Frank Miller, who had been watching through his own spotting scope, let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Rebecca, that shot was surgical." Carl Henderson nodded in amazement. "I've been shooting for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like the consistency this woman shows." But Morrison's group was packing up their equipment, preparing to move to a different section of the range for handgun training. They had completed their demonstration of military marksmanship without ever paying serious attention to the woman, whose shooting had surpassed their best efforts by significant margins. Rebecca began cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else, but she could feel the familiar tension that came with suppressed competitive instincts. She had spent 18 years proving herself in a profession that didn't easily accept women, and she had done it by letting her performance speak louder than her words. But retirement had taught her that some battles weren't worth fighting, and some recognition wasn't worth seeking. As she prepared to leave the range, Rebecca reflected on the irony of her situation. She had once been capable of eliminating targets at distances that would have seemed impossible to most of the men who had dismissed her today. But now, in civilian life, her greatest challenge wasn't making impossible shots under combat conditions. It was learning to be invisible in a world that had never known what she was capable of achieving. But what Rebecca didn't know was that one person at the range had been paying very close attention to her shooting, and in 30 seconds, that observation would lead to a revelation that would change everything the soldiers thought they knew about the quiet woman. They had ignored all morning as Rebecca packed her equipment with the methodical precision that marked everything she did. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres finished his own shooting session at the far end of the range. Torres was different from Morrison's group. Older, more experienced, and possessed of the kind of observational skills that came from multiple tours in special operations. He had been watching Rebecca's shooting for the past hour, and what he had observed had triggered memories and recognition that the others had missed entirely. Torres approached Rebecca's position with the respectful demeanor of someone who recognized exceptional skill when he saw it. Unlike Morrison's group, who moved with the confident swagger of conventional soldiers, Torres carried himself with the quiet professionalism of someone who had operated at the highest levels of military service. "Ma'am," Torres said quietly, his voice carrying genuine respect, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but that shooting I just watched was absolutely exceptional." Rebecca looked up from her rifle case, studying Torres with the same careful attention she had once used to evaluate potential threats. She saw intelligence in his eyes, professionalism in his bearing, and something else, a recognition that suggested he understood what he had been watching. "Thank you," Rebecca replied simply. "I enjoy the precision required." Torres nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've served with some of the best marksmen in the military. What you just demonstrated at 500 yards, that's not recreational shooting. That's professional level precision." Rebecca felt the familiar caution that came with being recognized for skills she preferred to keep hidden. "I've had some training." "Some training," Torres repeated with a slight smile. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what I just watched represents years of advanced instruction and probably more practice round than most people fire in a lifetime." As they spoke, Morrison's group was setting up for handgun training at the shorter range lanes. Their conversation carried across the range as they discussed their preferences in sidearms and shared stories about firefights where accurate pistol shooting had made a difference between life and death. Torres glanced toward the soldiers, then back at Rebecca. "Those are good soldiers, but they don't know what they missed. The shooting you just completed would have impressed instructors at the Army Marksmanship Unit." Rebecca continued packing her equipment, but she could sense that Torres was building towards something more than casual conversation. "Sergeant Torres," she said, having noted his rank from his conversation with other shooters, "what exactly are you getting at?" Torres hesitated for a moment, then made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of the morning. "Ma'am, when you were setting up for that 500-yard shot, I noticed something. You adjusted your position in a very specific way, compensating for the range's slight downward slope in a manner that's taught at only one school I know of." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken slightly, but she maintained her calm exterior. "Sergeant, I think you might be reading too much into basic shooting technique." "Ma'am, you adjusted your point of aim by exactly 2 clicks left to compensate for the range's magnetic declination. That's not basic technique. That's advanced precision shooting that accounts for variables most marksmen never even consider." Torres stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Rebecca could hear him. "Ma'am, I attended the Army's advanced marksmanship course 3 years ago. The instructor mentioned that some of the techniques we were learning had been developed by graduates of specialized schools. Schools that train snipers for operations that require precision beyond normal military standards." Rebecca set down her rifle case and gave Torres her full attention. She could see that he had identified specific elements of her technique that were indeed signatures of advanced training. and that he was intelligent enough to understand their implications. Sergeant Torres, what are you suggesting? Torres glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then spoke with quiet certainty. Ma'am, I'm suggesting that your shooting technique indicates training from the Army Scout Sniper School, or possibly something even more advanced. The precision, the environmental adjustments, the consistency, that's not civilian marksmanship. That's professional sniper training. The conversation was interrupted by loud laughter from Morrison's group, who had apparently completed a successful handgun drill and were celebrating their performance. Their confidence was evident as they discussed their shooting with the kind of detailed analysis that marked them as serious students of marksmanship. Check this out. Morrison called his friends, gesturing toward a target that showed impressive grouping at 25 yards. 5 rounds, 2-inch group with a service pistol. That's the kind of shooting that counts when the situation gets real. Danny Chin nodded approvingly. Outstanding work, Jake. That's exactly the kind of precision that made you such an effective squad leader. Torres watched the soldiers' demonstration with professional interest, but his attention remained focused on Rebecca. Ma'am, those are skilled shooters, but what you demonstrate with that rifle represents a completely different level of training and capability. Rebecca made a decision that surprised her even as she made it. Perhaps it was Torres' respectful approach, or his obvious understanding of what he had observed, or simply the fact that keeping secrets had become more exhausting than revealing them. Sergeant Torres, she said quietly, what would you say if I told you that I spent 18 years as a sniper of the United States Army, including multiple deployments and advanced training that I'm not authorized to discuss in detail? Torres' expression didn't change, but Rebecca could see the confirmation in his eyes. Ma'am, I would say that explains everything I observed, and that it's an honor to meet someone with your level of expertise. My call sign was Frost, Rebecca continued, watching Torres' reaction carefully. 18 years, 3 different theaters of operation, confirmed activities that are still classified. Torres straightened slightly, and Rebecca could see recognition dawning in his expression. Ma'am, are you saying you're Rebecca Mitchell? The Rebecca Mitchell? Rebecca felt a mixture of surprise and apprehension. You know that name? Ma'am, every sniper in the Army knows that name. You're legendary. The instruction cadre at the advanced course still use some of your techniques in their curriculum. There are shot records attributed to Frost that people thought were exaggerated until they met instructors who had served with you. The revelation hung between them for a moment, both understanding that the conversation had moved into territory that demanded discretion. Rebecca had revealed her identity to a stranger, something she hadn't done since retiring, and Torres had confirmed that her reputation had outlasted her service. Morrison's group had moved closer to their position, setting up for what appeared to be a more challenging handgun drill. Their conversation was becoming more animated as they discussed the technical aspects of combat marksmanship and shared stories about engagements where superior shooting had provided tactical advantages. The key to effective pistol work in combat, Morrison was explaining to a civilian shooter who had asked for advice, is understanding that accuracy under stress requires training that goes beyond recreational shooting. You need to be able to perform when your life depends on it. Torres caught Rebecca's eye and nodded toward the soldiers. Ma'am, would you consider demonstrating some of your pistol techniques? I think it might be educational. Rebecca looked at Torres carefully, understanding exactly what he was suggesting. She could continue packing her equipment and leave quietly, maintaining her anonymity and avoiding any potential complications. Or she could accept the implicit challenge and demonstrate that her skills extended beyond rifle marksmanship. Sergeant Torres, what exactly do you have in mind? Torres smiled slightly. Ma'am, nothing dramatic. Just a simple demonstration of precision pistol shooting. Maybe something that would give these soldiers a chance to see what advanced training really looks like. Rebecca considered the proposition. Part of her was tempted to simply leave and maintain her peaceful retirement. But another part, the part that had driven her to become one of the most effective snipers in military history, was curious to see how Morrison's confidence will hold up when confronted with genuine expertise. Sergeant Torres, If I were to accept your suggestion, what would be an appropriate demonstration? Torres looked toward Morrison's group, who were preparing for shots at what they clearly considered a challenging distance for handgun work. Ma'am, they're setting up for precision shooting at 50 yards with service pistols. They seem to think that's pushing the limits of what's possible. Rebecca followed his gaze and assessed the situation. 50 yards was indeed challenging for handgun marksmanship, requiring excellent technique and significant practice to achieve consistent accuracy. For Morrison's group, it represented a serious test of their skills. For Rebecca, it was a warm-up exercise. But what neither Rebecca nor Torres realized was that their conversation had been partially overheard by Danny Chun, who possessed both excellent hearing and enough intelligence to understand that something significant was being discussed. And in 10 seconds, Chun would make an observation that would transform a quiet conversation into a revelation that would leave everyone at the range questioning everything they thought they knew about the woman they had been ignoring all morning. Danny Chun had been adjusting his equipment when he caught fragments of the conversation between Torres and Rebecca. His intelligence training had taught him to pay attention to details that others might miss, and something about the way Torres was speaking, with a level of respect that seemed inconsistent with addressing a casual shooter, had captured his attention. As Chun moved closer under the pretense of retrieving ammunition from his bag, he heard Torres mention something about legendary status and confirmed activities. What really caught his attention was when he glimpsed something that made his blood run cold. As Rebecca reached for her pistol case, her sleeve rolled up slightly, revealing a small but distinctive tattoo on the inside of her wrist. It was faded and weathered, but Chin recognized it immediately. The cross rifles and scope reticle that marked graduates of the Army's most elite sniper training program. More specifically, it was a variant used by graduates of the classified advanced course that produced the military's most lethal precision shooters. Chin stood frozen for a moment, processing what he had seen. That tattoo wasn't something you could fake or earn through casual military service. It was earned through a selection process that had a failure rate of over 90%, and it marked someone who had operated at the highest levels of military precision shooting. Holy shit, Chin whispered, loud enough for Torres to hear, but quiet enough to avoid drawing attention from Morrison's group. Torres and Rebecca both turned toward Chun, who was staring at Rebecca with an expression of recognition and something approaching awe. Ma'am, Chin said quietly, his earlier casual confidence replaced by genuine respect. I just saw your ink. That's a sniper school tattoo. Not just any sniper school, that's the advanced course. The one that produces the people who don't officially exist. Rebecca instinctively pulled her sleeve down, but it was too late. Chen had seen enough to identify not just her military background, but the specific level of training that had marked her as one of the elite. Torres looked between Chun and Rebecca, understanding that the situation had just become more complicated. Danny, what exactly did you see? Chen approached slowly. His demeanor completely changed from the confident soldier who had been joking with his friends minutes earlier. Sergeant Torres, if that tattoo is real, we're not talking to a veteran with some marksmanship training. We're talking to someone who completed the most classified sniper course in the U.S. military. Morrison, who had been focused on his own shooting preparation, noticed a sudden change in Chen's behavior. Danny, what's got you spooked? You look like you've seen a ghost. Chen glanced toward Rebecca, then back at Morrison. Jake, I think we need to pay attention to something. What are you talking about? Chen lowered his voice, but his words carried clearly in the relatively quiet range environment. The woman we've been ignoring all morning. I think she might be more than just a recreational shooter. Morrison looked toward Rebecca with mild curiosity, still not understanding the significance of what Chen had observed. Danny, she's just some civilian who likes to shoot. What's the big deal? Jake, Chin said carefully, that civilian has a tattoo that indicates training from a program that officially doesn't exist. The kind of program that produces snipers with confirmed kill counts that are classified at levels we'll never see. Morrison's attention was now fully focused on conversation. He looked at Rebecca with new interest, trying to reconcile the quiet woman in civilian clothes with Chen's description of elite military training. Torres stepped forward, understanding that the situation required careful management. Staff Sergeant Morrison, perhaps we should approach this with appropriate respect. Morrison studied Torres, noting his serious demeanor and the way both he and Chun were treating the situation. Sergeant Torres, are you saying this woman is some kind of special operations veteran? I'm saying, Torres replied carefully, that the shooting I observed this morning, combined with certain indicators, suggests that we may be in the presence of someone with exceptional military experience. Rebecca watched the conversation unfold with a calm alertness that had kept her alive through 18 years of dangerous operations. She could see the dynamics shifting as the soldiers began to understand that they had made incorrect assumptions about her background and capabilities. Morrison approached Rebecca with more respectful demeanor, though his confidence remained evident. Ma'am, my men seem to think you have some significant military background. Would you mind sharing what your service included? Rebecca looked at Morrison carefully, assessing his motivations and the potential consequences of revealing more about her background. Staff Sergeant Morrison, I served in the Army for 18 years. Most of my service involves specialized roles that I'm not authorized to discuss in detail. Specialized roles in marksmanship? Morrison pressed. Among other things, yes. Chin stepped closer, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and curiosity. Ma'am, that tattoo indicates completion of training that produces fewer than a dozen graduates per year. If you completed that program, you're operating at a level that most military marksmen never even approach. Morrison's competitive instincts were now fully engaged. He had built his reputation on being one of the best shooters in his unit, and the suggestion that he had been sharing a range with someone significantly more skilled challenged his self-image. Ma'am, Morrison said, would you be willing to demonstrate some of your techniques? My men, and I would be honored to observe precision shooting from someone with your level of training. Rebecca sensed the undercurrent of challenge in Morrison's words. Despite his respectful tone, she could accept gracefully and demonstrate her capabilities, or she could decline and maintain her quiet anonymity. But she could also sense that her secret was already out and that these soldiers would not easily accept dismissal. Staff Sergeant Morrison, what kind of demonstration did you have in mind? Morrison gestured toward the 50-yard pistol range where his group had been preparing to shoot. We were about to test our precision with service pistols at 50 yards. That's considered challenging shooting for most military marksmen. Perhaps you could show us how it's done at your level of training. Torres caught Rebecca's eye and nodded slightly, understanding that she was being challenged to reveal her capabilities in a way that would either confirm or dispel the growing suspicions about her background. Rebecca made her decision with the same calm certainty that had guided her through countless life-or-death situations. Staff Sergeant Morrison, I'll accept your invitation, but I should warn you that the techniques I learned in my advanced training might be different from what you're accustomed to seeing. We're all students when it comes to improving our marksmanship, ma'am, Morrison replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't expecting to be particularly impressed. Rebecca retrieved her pistol from its case, a custom .45 that had been modified with precision components that would have been at home in a competitive shooting circuit. As she loaded the magazine and prepared for demonstration, she could feel the attention of every person on the range focusing on her position. Morrison's group gathered around to observe, their earlier casual confidence now tempered by curiosity about what they were about to witness. The civilian shooters who had been watching Rebecca's rifle work all morning moved closer, sensing that something significant was about to happen. 50 yards, 5 rounds, Morrison announced. Let's see how advanced training translates to practical marksmanship. Rebecca settled into her shooting stance with movements so smooth and practiced that they seemed choreographed. Her grip on the pistol was relaxed but absolute, her breathing controlled and rhythmic. She aligned the sights with mechanical precision, calculating the environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory over the 50-yard distance. But what happened next would shatter every assumption the soldiers had made about civilian marksmanship and reveal just how vast a gap could be between good shooting and legendary precision. The first shot broke with perfect timing, the bullet striking the target with an accuracy that made Morrison's earlier challenging shots look amateurish by comparison. But Rebecca wasn't finished. 4 more shots followed in rapid succession, each one placed with surgical precision in a group so tight that the electronic scoring system struggled to register them as separate impacts. When the shooting stopped, the range fell completely silent. Rebecca's 5-shot group at 50 yards measured less than 1 inch. Precision that would have been noteworthy at half the distance, and virtually impossible for most marksmen at the distance she had just demonstrated. Danichin stared at the target through the spotting scope, unable to process what he was seeing. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "That's not just expert marksmanship. That's inhuman precision." Torres nodded grimly. "Danny, now you understand what 18 years of advanced training can produce. What we just witnessed represents the absolute pinnacle of military marksmanship capability." But Morrison was still staring at the target, his earlier confidence completely shattered by a demonstration that had revealed the vast difference between competent military shooting and true expertise. And in that moment of stunned silence, someone would finally speak the words that would confirm what everyone was beginning to suspect about the quiet woman who had just redefined their understanding of what precision shooting really meant. The silence that followed Rebecca's demonstration stretched across the range like a physical presence. Every shooter, from the most experienced veterans to the weekend recreational enthusiasts, stood transfixed by what they had just witnessed. The electronic scoring system continued to display Rebecca's group measurement. 0.7 inches at 50 yards with service pistol, a level of precision that defied conventional understanding of what was possible. Staff Sergeant Morrison approached the target with the slow, deliberate steps of someone whose worldview had just been fundamentally altered. He had spent years building his reputation as an exceptional marksman, and in 30 seconds, that reputation had been rendered meaningless by a demonstration that existed in a completely different realm of capability. "Ma'am," Morrison said quietly, his earlier swagger replaced by genuine humility, "I owe you an apology. We've been sharing this range with someone operating at a level I didn't even know existed." Rebecca holstered her pistol with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else, but she could see the impact her demonstration had made on everyone present. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, you and your men are skilled shooters. You've earned your confidence through legitimate training and combat experience. But what you just demonstrated," Danichin said, still staring at the target, "that's not just training. That's something else entirely." Torres stepped forward, understanding that the moment required context that only he could provide. "Gentlemen, what you just witnessed represents the pinnacle of military marksmanship training. The program that produces this level of capability selects candidates from the top 1% of military marksmen, and then eliminates 90% of those candidates during training." Morrison looked between Torres and Rebecca, beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had dismissed earlier in mourning. "Ma'am, what was your primary role during your 18 years of service?" Rebecca considered her response carefully. She had spent years learning to deflect such questions, but the demonstration had made further deflection pointless. "I was a sniper, Staff Sergeant Morrison. My primary responsibilities involved precision elimination of high-value targets in support of special operations." The words hung in the air with the weight of classified history and implications that the soldiers could only imagine. Frank Miller, the retired police sergeant who had watched Rebecca shoot for months, finally spoke up. "Rebecca, I've been watching you shoot for months, and I always knew there was something different about your technique. But this is incredible." Carl Henderson nodded in agreement. "I've been telling people for weeks that you were the best shooter I'd ever seen, but even I didn't understand what that meant." Rebecca felt the familiar discomfort that came with being the center of attention, but she also recognized an opportunity to bridge the gap between the military and civilian shooting communities. "What I demonstrated today represents years of training and thousands of practice rounds. But the principles behind it, controlled breathing, consistent grip, sight alignment, trigger control, those are the same fundamentals that every marksman uses." Morrison shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what you just did goes beyond fundamentals. That was artistic." Danny Chun had been studying Rebecca's pistol, noting the modifications and custom components that marked it as a precision instrument. "Ma'am, may I ask about your equipment? That pistol has been extensively modified for accuracy." "It has," Rebecca confirmed. "When you spend years depending on your weapon for survival, you learn to optimize every component that affects performance. The trigger work, barrel fitting, sight adjustments. Every modification serves a specific purpose." Torres gestured toward the target that still displayed Rebecca's impossible group. "Ma'am, would you be willing to share some of the techniques that produce this level of accuracy? I think everyone here would benefit from understanding your approach." Rebecca looked around at the group of soldiers and civilians who were watching her with expressions of genuine respect and curiosity. For 18 years, she had been prohibited from discussing the specific techniques that made her one of the military's most effective snipers. But those restrictions didn't apply to general marksmanship principles that could help these people become better shooters. "The most important factor," Rebecca began, "is understanding that precision shooting is about consistency, not strength. Every aspect of your shooting technique, stance, grip, breathing, sight picture, trigger control, must be exactly the same for every shot." She demonstrated her grip technique, showing how each finger placement was calculated to provide maximum control while minimizing disturbance to the weapon's alignment. Her breathing pattern was deliberate and rhythmic, designed to provide natural respiratory pauses where the shot could be fired without movement. The second critical factor is understanding your equipment. Every weapon has its own characteristics, how it responds to environmental conditions, where it naturally shoots, how different ammunition affects point of impact. You must know your weapon better than you know yourself. Morrison watched intently as Rebecca explained her sight alignment technique. "Ma'am, how do you account for environmental factors at longer distances? At extended ranges, you must consider wind, speed, and direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, even the rotation of the Earth. Each factor affects bullet trajectory in specific ways that can be calculated and compensated for." She pulled out a small notebook filled with ballistic charts and environmental correction tables, the kind of detailed reference material that marked a true precision shooting professional. These charts represent years of data collection under different conditions. Every shot I fire adds information that improves my ability to predict bullet behavior. Danichin studied the charts with obvious fascination. "Ma'am, this level of detail is incredible. How do you process all these variables in a combat situation?" "Training," Rebecca replied simply. "When you practice the calculations thousands of times, they become automatic. In a combat situation, you don't have time to consult charts. You must internalize the data until environmental compensation becomes instinctive." The conversation continued for another hour as Rebecca shared insights that bridged the gap between technical knowledge and practical application. She demonstrated shooting positions that maximize stability, breathing techniques that optimize consistency, and mental preparation methods that maintain focus under pressure. Frank Miller had been taking notes throughout the discussion. "Rebecca, this is the most valuable shooting instruction I've ever received. Would you consider offering formal classes?" Rebecca smiled at the suggestion. "Frank, I'm retired. I came here for peaceful practice, not to start a new career." Torres looked at her seriously. "Ma'am, with respect, what you shared today represents knowledge that could benefit law enforcement, military, and civilian shooters throughout this region. That's a valuable service to the community." Morrison nodded enthusiastically. "Ma'am, I've learned more about marksmanship in the past hour than I did in months of military training. If you ever reconsider retirement, there will be tremendous interest in learning from someone with your expertise." Rebecca looked around at the group of people who had gathered to listen to her impromptu instruction session. Soldiers, police officers, hunters, and recreational shooters, all united by their respect for precision marksmanship and their eagerness to improve their skills. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "but for today, I think we've covered enough material to keep everyone busy for quite a while." As the group began to disperse, Morrison approached Rebecca privately. "Ma'am, I want to apologize again for the way we dismissed you earlier. We made assumptions that were completely wrong, and it nearly caused us to miss an opportunity to learn from someone truly exceptional." Rebecca studied the young soldier's face, seeing genuine remorse and respect in his expression. Staff Sergeant Morrison, you and your men are good soldiers who have earned your confidence through legitimate service. Don't let one morning surprise diminish your understanding of your own capabilities. But it puts things in perspective, Morrison replied. It shows us how much we still have to learn, and how important it is to recognize excellence wherever we find it. As Rebecca packed her equipment for the final time that morning, she reflected on the unexpected turn the day had taken. She had come to the range for a routine practice in quiet solitude, but instead had found herself sharing knowledge and techniques that she had guarded as classified secrets for nearly 2 decades. Danichin approached as she was closing her rifle case. Ma'am, thank you for taking the time to teach us. What you've shared today will make all of us better shooters and better soldiers. Danny, Rebecca replied, the most important lesson isn't about shooting technique. It's about recognizing that expertise comes in many forms, and that assumptions can blind us to opportunities to learn and grow. Torres was the last to say goodbye, his expression thoughtful as he considered the morning's revelations. Ma'am, I hope you'll seriously consider Frank's suggestion about instruction. There are a lot of people who could benefit from your knowledge. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. Sergeant Torres, retirement has taught me that service doesn't always require a uniform. Perhaps there are other ways to contribute. As Rebecca left Pine Ridge shooting range that morning, she carried with her a new understanding of her place in the civilian world. For months, she had been invisible to the soldiers and tactical enthusiasts who frequented the range, dismissed as irrelevant by people who couldn't see past their own assumptions. But today had proven that expertise couldn't be hidden forever, and that respect, once earned, could bridge any gap between military and civilian communities. The woman they had ignored all morning had revealed herself to be one of the most skilled marksmen any of them would ever encounter. 3 months later, Pine Ridge Shooting Range announced a new advanced marksmanship program taught by a retired military instructor whose credentials were described simply as extensive special operations experience. The classes filled immediately, with waiting lists that extended for months. Rebecca Frost Mitchell had found a new mission in retirement, passing on the skills and knowledge that had made her legendary to a new generation of shooters who would carry those lessons forward long after her active service had ended. The soldiers who had dismissed her as just another civilian had learned that the most dangerous person on any range might be the quiet woman in civilian clothes who never felt the need to announce her capabilities. And they had discovered that true expertise was often found in the most unexpected places, carried by people who had earned their skills through sacrifice and dedication that others could barely imagine. The sniper school tattoo that had revealed her identity was a mark of achievement that represented years of the most demanding training the military had to offer. But the real mark of her expertise was the precision she brought to every shot, the knowledge she shared with every student, and the respect she earned from everyone who was wise enough to look beyond appearances and recognize excellence in its purest form. Sometimes the most lethal weapon on the range belonged to the person everyone ignored, and sometimes the most valuable teacher was the one who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone smart enough to ask the right questions and humble enough to listen to the answers. Rebecca had learned that retirement didn't mean the end of service. It meant finding new ways to protect and educate the people who would carry on the mission she had served for 18 years. And the soldiers who had learned from her that morning would never again make the mistake of underestimating the quiet woman with the precise shots and the faded tattoo that marked her as one of the finest marksmen in military history.